Hi, everyone. My name is Troy Lambert, mystery and thriller author and the education lead for Plottr. And today we're going to talk about the story spine method. Now, the story spine method was originally created by playwright Ken Adams and has been used by writers in all genres, especially films and plays, to create all kinds of compelling stories. It's explored and detailed in the book How to Improvise a Full-Length Play, The Art of Spontaneous Theater. Now, the story spine is such a good and effective method that Pixar, Disney, and Lucasfilm, the creator of Star Wars, train all of their incoming writers to use it. They believe this method, similar to the three-act structure, is a fantastic foundation for any well-constructed story that's designed to keep audiences engaged. Now, who should use the story spine method and why? Well, the story spine method is a good choice for those who like to improvise, as the title of the book implies, or discovery write between tentpole events that happen sequentially in a story. It's a simple but effective plot structure. It's often used to create fairy tales, recreate classic stories in a fresh new way, and even for epic space dramas like the films in the Star Wars universe. If you want to engage and delight your audience like the creators of Cars and Toy Story, this plot structure may be right for you. With that, let's take an in-depth look at the story spine plot structure. Our story begins, as many fairy tales do, once upon a time. You don't have to use those exact words, but the idea is there. This section introduces the readers to the protagonist in their ordinary world. It introduces the main characters at the same time. It also sets clear expectations and an understanding of what life is currently like for them, whether that's a good or a bad thing, or a mix of the two. Because then, the next section is titled Every Day. Now, every day, the protagonist's routine is established in this section. It introduces a typical day in the life of our hero, establishes their routine, their daily interactions. This is also where you develop your setting. You let us know where the story takes place and how that impacts our main character. That then sets up the next section, which is titled But One Day. In But One Day, the protagonist's routine changes, or something happens that disrupts their routine and sets them onto the path into our story and towards a new world. At the same time, we see the goals of the protagonist. What do they need or want? Why does it matter so much to them? Be sure to reveal their goals and motives here both, because what comes next is because of that. Now, because of that comes with a few parts. The first one is the initial conflict. Breaking the routine causes dire consequences for the protagonist. It forces them out of their comfort zone to face danger and challenges. And each challenge allows the protagonist to grow. Most of the time, this happens through failure of some kind. They will learn and gain new skills, but only through difficulty. Then we have a second part of because of that. The first consequences lead to the next set of challenges, which are more dangerous and more difficult to overcome. Be sure this set of consequences stems from the previous section. It's often a reaction to the character's failure or to something that has happened to them. At this point, the reader or viewer doubts that the hero will be able to overcome their circumstances and be victorious. It looks like it's very possible that they're going to lose. Then we move on to because of that, part 3. Now, depending upon your story, you may have more than 3 because of that circumstances. This one, however, outlines how our protagonist has done so far. The challenges continue to pile up, becoming ever more difficult and dangerous. These lead to a midpoint where a protagonist takes action rather than reacting to what has happened to them, although they may need help from allies to do so. This is where the stakes increase, drama and tension increase, and we see the final moment where a protagonist fails and reaches what we often call the dark night of the soul. All hope is lost, but only for a moment, because the next section is titled Until Finally. The until finally section of our story is where the protagonist faces off against the antagonist and either succeeds or fails. They fail if the story is a drama or a tragedy. This is the payoff that the reader's been waiting for. Make it huge. Make it resolve everything that has led up to this point. Have the protagonist use all they've learned so far and show how the protagonist has grown since the beginning of the story and how that enables them to be victorious. Now, in most of the kinds of story that use the story spine, the protagonist wins, but some of them, including fairy tales, can be surprisingly dark. Whatever happens, what comes next is then and ever since then. The ever since then is where the protagonist has established a new routine and now returns to the ordinary world with their new set of skills, their new knowledge, and a new perspective. We show the final growth of the character, and this is a series. We hint at where things might be going next. This step is also known as the return to the fold, the denouement, and it's often contained in an epilogue that shows the results of the climax. Your protagonist has now completed their journey, and that means you have finished your story. Congratulations. But what does this look like if we take this story structure and apply it to an example? Well, for that, we're going to take a look at Cinderella. Now, Cinderella is a story that's been told countless times, from children's books to the Disney animated classic, and even an ice-cold performance. It's a timeless romance with a great sense of fashion, which clearly I've learned a lot from. This plot fits perfectly within the story spine plot structure. It starts with Act 1 and the beginning, and the first beat, which is Once Upon a Time. This is where we talk about Cinderella's beginning. Cinderella is a beautiful, charismatic young girl. She lived with her widowed father on a luxurious estate, but he gets remarried after her mother dies to Lady Tremaine, who is a widow with 2 daughters of her own, and then her father dies shortly thereafter. But Lady Tremaine is jealous of her stepdaughter's beauty, and she's determined to forward her own daughter's interests ahead of hers. So she orders Cinderella to become a servant in her own home, overburdening her with chores all of the time. As a result, every day Cinderella's stepsisters take advantage of her meekness. They constantly mock her and add to her workload. Despite this, Cinderella remains kind. She obediently does her chores, and she also takes care of the mice and the birds and the animals that live on the property and makes friends with them, especially 2 mice named Jacques and Gus. Now, she decides to protect them from her stepmother's cat, Lucifer, and Lady Tremaine makes Cinderella's duties even harder as revenge. But what happens next? Well, one day, the king of the land, who has become impatient for his son to choose a bride and produce an heir, decides to hold a ball, and he invites all the eligible maidens in the kingdom, regardless of their social status, so that the prince will hopefully choose a wife from among them. Of course, Cinderella wants to attend. Because of that, Cinderella finds a dress of her late mother's that she can repair and wear to the event. But her stepmother and stepsisters deliberately keep her busy, afraid of how much prettier she is. They assign her extra chores, they leave her no time to prepare herself for the ball. But Jacques and Gus and the other animals decide to fix up the dress for her. They use beads and other materials like a sash the stepsisters had thrown away. And with their help, Cinderella is ready to go to the ball. However, when she attempts to go with her family, her stepsisters rip out the parts that belong to them, leaving the dress in pieces. Cinderella is alone, and she's been left behind. Because of that, Cinderella storms out to the garden. She's distraught, and then she meets her fairy godmother, who arrives to help her. Her fairy godmother creates a coach from a pumpkin, transforms mice into majestic horses, and turns an old horse and a dog into a coachman and a footman. She also provides a gorgeous gown for Cinderella to wear to the ball, and a stunning, but I'd consider rather impractical, pair of glass slippers. The only catch? The magic ends at the stroke of midnight, so Cinderella must be gone from the ball and on her way home by then, Otherwise, the prince is going to realize who she really is. When Cinderella arrives, the prince is instantly smitten. The king orders the Grand Duke to make sure no one interferes with their evening. He keeps the other ladies held back as Cinderella and the prince dance and wander outside on the palace grounds for a wonderful conversation. Her stepsisters don't recognize her, and they wonder who the woman is that the prince is so stricken with from afar. And then because of that, when the clock tolls midnight, Cinderella panics and runs away before she and the prince can exchange names, phone numbers, or Instagram handles. The Grand Duke tries to stop her, but Cinderella manages to flee the palace, losing one of her slippers along the way. Cinderella and the animals revert to their former appearance when the magic ends. But Cinderella discovers that one thing remains, and that's the other glass slipper. It's still on her foot, and so she takes it home. The prince is now in love with Cinderella and states he will only marry the girl whose foot fits the glass slipper. Since they don't know who that is, the king orders the Grand Duke to try it on every girl in the kingdom until he finds her. Until finally, when the Grand Duke comes around, Lady Tremaine locks Cinderella in her attic bedroom and allows him to inspect her stepsisters. Of course, he discovers that the slipper does not fit either of them, even though they try really hard. Jacques and Gus steal the key, struggle upstairs, and try to free Cinderella. Despite a last-minute offensive from Lucifer the cat, the mice succeed with the help of the other animals, and a freed Cinderella runs downstairs to meet the Grand Duke. At the sight of her, Lady Tremaine causes the Duke's page to trip and break the glass slipper. All seems lost at that moment, but Cinderella reveals she still has the other slipper. Finally, as the Grand Duke places it successfully on her foot, now the kingdom knows who the prince is actually in love with. And ever since then, well, the Duke brings Cinderella back to the castle, the king celebrates, the prince is ecstatic, now even more in love. Cinderella and the prince are married. They share a kiss as they set off in a carriage to enjoy their honeymoon. This is a wonderful story, but you've probably seen other stories that clearly follow the story spine. Let us know what those are in the comments below, or if you've used the story spine for your own content. And if you love this content, hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell so you never miss an update. And if you're not a Plottr user already, visit try.plottr.com/free trial to check it out for yourself today. We look forward to hearing what you think and seeing you in the Plottr community. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.